The monitor flatlined at 3:33 a.m. That's when I saw them. Dark figures hovering in the corners of the emergency room, their presence felt but unseen by the medical team fighting to restart my heart. As my spirit rose above my lifeless body, I witnessed something extraordinary. Ancient symbols burning through my skin, glowing with a blue light that seemed to reach into the depths of time itself. What Jesus revealed to me in those 7 minutes of clinical death would shake the foundations of history and expose a truth so powerful that forces beyond our world have tried to silence it for centuries. The night before it happened, I couldn't sleep. Something felt different in the air, heavy, like the moments before a devastating storm. My bedroom window kept rattling, though there wasn't any wind. The digital clock on my nightstand flickered between 3:33 and 3:34, its red numbers pulsing with an intensity that made my eyes hurt. I should have known these were signs, warnings of what was about to unfold. That morning started like any other, or so I thought. I went through my usual routine: coffee, shower, checking the news. The headlines screamed about racial tensions, protests in major cities, and a growing divide that seemed to be tearing our nation apart. As I scrolled through my phone, my hands trembled slightly, something they'd never done before. The coffee cup slipped from my fingers, shattering on the kitchen floor, dark liquid spreading like an omen across the white tiles. I remember looking at myself in the bathroom mirror, really looking, as if some part of me knew this would be the last time I'd see myself as the same person. Dark circles hung under my eyes, testament to weeks of restless nights filled with dreams I couldn't quite remember but left me drenched in sweat. My grandmother's cross, the one she'd pressed into my palm before passing, felt unusually warm against my chest. The drive to work took me through downtown, past the historical district where protesters had gathered just days before. Their signs still littered the ground, messages about justice and equality fading in the morning sun. Traffic was heavier than usual, forcing me to take the route past Old Trinity Church, where my grandmother used to tell me stories about spiritual warriors and ancient truths. I hadn't been there in years, but today its spire seemed to pierce the clouds with unusual significance. My hands gripped the steering wheel tighter as I approached the intersection of 7th and Main. The traffic light turned yellow, then red, but something made me stop even before it changed. An instinct, a whisper, or maybe divine intervention. Seconds later, a truck barreled through the crossing, running its light. That's when the pain hit, sharp, crushing, like my chest was caught in a vice. The world started to slow down. Through my windshield, I could see people walking on the sidewalk. A mother holding her child's hand, an elderly man with a cane, a group of teenagers laughing about something on their phones. None of them knew what was about to happen. None of them could see what I was seeing. The edges of reality starting to blur, the colors becoming too bright, too intense. I tried to pull over, my car drifting toward the curb as my vision narrowed. The last thing I remember clearly was reaching for my phone, trying to dial 911. But my fingers wouldn't cooperate. Through the passenger window, I caught a glimpse of the church again, and for a moment, just a moment, I thought I saw figures standing in its doorway, watching, waiting. Then everything went black. The doctors would later tell me I was clinically dead for 7 minutes. 7 minutes that would change not just my life, but would reveal a truth so profound, so earth-shattering, that forces beyond our understanding had worked for centuries to keep it hidden. What I saw during those 7 minutes would shake the foundations of everything we thought we knew about history, spirituality, and the true power that lies dormant within certain bloodlines. This is my testimony. This is my truth. And despite the threats, despite the attempts to silence me, despite the shadows that now follow my every move, I have to share what Jesus revealed to me about the true spiritual heritage of Black people. The pain was unlike anything I had ever experienced, radiating from my chest with such intensity that it felt like my ribs were being crushed from the inside. My car drifted to the side of the road, tires scraping against the curb as my consciousness began to fade. Through the haze of agony, I could hear the screech of brakes, the distant sound of car horns, and someone shouting, "Call an ambulance." Sarah Martinez, a nurse who happened to be walking by, would later testify to what happened next. She saw my car slowly come to a stop, noticed my slumped figure through the window, and immediately rushed to help. According to her statement, my skin had taken on a gray pallor, and my pulse was barely detectable. "I've been a nurse for 15 years, she told the doctors later, and I knew right away this was serious. No breath sounds, no pulse, classic signs of cardiac arrest. But there was something else, something I've never seen before. Her face. It was peaceful, almost glowing. The paramedics arrived within 4 minutes. The incident report, filed by EMT James Wilson, noted the time of arrival as 8:47 a.m. They found me in full cardiac arrest. The medical report would later detail their desperate attempts to restart my heart. 3 rounds of epinephrine, 4 attempts with the defibrillator, continuous chest compressions. I remember watching all of this from above. The sensation was strange, not like floating, not like flying, but a state of perfect awareness. I could see everything. The paramedics working frantically over my body, the growing crowd of onlookers, the police officer directing traffic around the scene. But more than that, I could feel everything. The grief of a woman in the crowd who had lost her mother to a similar incident last year, the determination of the young paramedic who refused to give up on me, the silent prayers of a priest who had stopped to offer comfort. The emergency team managed to get a pulse. Weak, thready, but present. They loaded me into the ambulance, sirens wailing as they rushed toward Central Hospital. Dr. Elena Rodriguez, the attending physician in the ER that morning, would later write in her report, "Patient arrived in critical condition. Initial ECG showed severe abnormalities. What happened next defies medical explanation." What Dr. Rodriguez couldn't explain was the moment my heart stopped again in the ER. The monitor's steady beep turned into that dreaded continuous tone. The crash team rushed in, but before they could reach me, something extraordinary happened. The room grew still, and in that stillness, I felt myself being pulled away. Not toward any light, not toward any tunnel, but into a realm where time itself seemed to pause. The last thing I heard was Dr. Rodriguez calling out, "Time of death, 9:17 a.m. But death wasn't the end. It was only the beginning. In that moment between life and death, everything changed. The chaos of the emergency room faded away, replaced by a profound silence that seemed to resonate through my very being. The medical equipment, the doctors, the harsh fluorescent lights, all of it dissolved into a gentle darkness that felt more like an embrace than an absence of light. My consciousness expanded beyond anything I had ever experienced. Every memory, every emotion, every moment of my life seemed to exist simultaneously. I could feel my grandmother's presence, not as a memory but as a tangible force. The same warmth I had felt from her cross that morning now enveloped my entire being. The darkness began to shift, not breaking but transforming. I became aware of presences around me, countless souls, each radiating with their own unique light. They weren't strangers. Somehow I recognized them. Ancestors, warriors, teachers. Each one had walked this path before me. Each one had carried a piece of the truth I was about to discover. A soft voice, familiar yet otherworldly, spoke my name. Not the name on my driver's license or medical charts, but my true name, one I had never heard before, yet recognized instantly. The voice belonged to my great-grandmother, a woman I had never met in life, but whose stories had shaped my childhood. "It's time," she said, her words carrying the weight of generations. The darkness parted like a curtain, revealing a path that seemed to be made of pure light. But this wasn't the stereotypical tunnel that people describe in near-death experiences. This was something different. A bridge between worlds, ancient and new, physical and spiritual. Each step I took along this path resonated with the heartbeats of those who had walked it before me. As I moved forward, guided by an unseen force, the air itself seemed to thicken with presence. Whispers in languages I didn't know yet, somehow understood, filled the space around me. They spoke of hidden truths, of power suppressed, of a destiny long forgotten but never truly lost. The voices grew stronger, more urgent, all leading to a single point ahead. That's when I saw him. Jesus stood before me, but not as the figure depicted in stained glass windows or religious paintings. His presence was overwhelming. Pure love and authority combined into a force that brought me to my knees. His eyes held the depths of time itself, and when he looked at me, I felt every layer of pretense and societal conditioning strip away. "My child," he said, his voice echoing through every dimension of existence, "you have been chosen to witness what has been hidden." His words carried no judgment, no condemnation, only a truth that had been waiting millennia to be revealed. Behind him, reality itself seemed to fold open like pages of an ancient book. Images began to form, not like watching a movie, but like remembering something I had always known but had somehow forgotten. I saw the beginning, the truth about my people, about our spiritual heritage, about the power that had been stolen, not just from our bodies but from our very souls. "Watch," he commanded, extending his hand toward the unfolding vision. "Remember, and then you must tell them." What he showed me next would shake the foundations of everything I thought I knew about history, about spirituality, and about the true nature of power. Jesus gestured, and before us appeared a vision of ancient Africa, but not as I had seen it in history books. This was Africa in its true glory, pulsing with spiritual power that made the air itself shimmer with energy. Great cities rose from the earth, their architecture defying modern understanding, not primitive structures, but manifestations of divine wisdom passed down from the beginning of time. "Watch carefully," Jesus said, his voice carrying the weight of centuries. "What you see has been hidden, not just from books, but from the collective memory of humanity." The scene shifted to show temples where priests and priestesses channeled powers that modern civilization has forgotten. They didn't just pray, they communicated directly with the divine, their connection so pure and powerful that miracles were commonplace. I saw the ancient kingdom of Kush, where rulers governed not just through political power, but through a profound spiritual authority that connected them directly to the divine realm. Their crowns weren't just symbols of earthly authority, they were conduits of celestial power, allowing them to heal, to prophesy, to maintain harmony between heaven and earth. The vision moved to Ethiopia, showing the true story of the Ark of the Covenant. They were chosen as guardians, Jesus explained, not by chance, but because they understood the true nature of divine power. They knew how to preserve it, protect it, and use it for the benefit of all humanity. Then came Egypt, but not the Egypt of tourist photographs and museum exhibits. This was Egypt in its spiritual prime, where the mysteries of life and death were understood at a level that modern science cannot comprehend. The pyramids pulsed with energy, serving as bridges between the physical and spiritual realms. "Your ancestors," Jesus said, "were not just builders of monuments, but keepers of divine knowledge." The scene changed to West Africa, where I saw the griots, but their role was far more profound than just storytellers. They were living libraries of spiritual power, each word they spoke carrying the vibration of divine truth. Their stories weren't just entertainment, they were keys to unlocking the spiritual potential within each person. "But then," Jesus said, his voice heavy with sorrow, "the great deception began." The vision darkened, showing shadows creeping across the continent. I saw spiritual forces, not human armies, but dark entities, recognizing the threat that this divine connection posed to their control over humanity. They knew, he continued, that if this power remained intact, their hold over the world would be broken. What followed was painful to watch. I saw the systematic suppression of spiritual truth. Ships arrived on the coasts, but they weren't just carrying physical chains. Dark spirits moved among the slavers, their true mission not just to capture bodies, but to sever the connection between the people and their spiritual power. The chains they used, Jesus revealed, were forged in both physical and spiritual realms. They didn't just enslave bodies, they worked to enslave souls, to make my children forget who they truly were. I watched as generation after generation was systematically stripped of their spiritual heritage, forced to adopt a twisted version of faith that emphasized submission rather than divine power. But then the vision shifted again, showing something remarkable. Despite centuries of oppression, the power remained. Like a dormant seed waiting for the right season, it passed through bloodlines, hidden but never destroyed. "Look," Jesus commanded, and I saw the truth. Every act of resistance, every movement for freedom, every uprising wasn't just political, it was spiritual power breaking through the chains. This is why they fear the awakening, Jesus explained. Not just the physical liberation, but the spiritual remembering. The vision showed the present day, where I saw the same dark forces working through systems of oppression, media manipulation, and false teachings, all designed to keep this power suppressed. But something was changing. I saw lights beginning to spark in individuals across the world, people awakening to their true spiritual heritage. The time of remembering has begun, Jesus declared. This is why you were brought here, why you must tell them. The power was never lost, only hidden. The connection was never broken, only suppressed. The time has come for my children to remember who they are. The vision ended with a scene of the future. Not a distant dream, but a reality that was already beginning to unfold. People of all nations, but especially Black people, stepping into their spiritual power, breaking not just physical chains but spiritual ones, leading humanity into a new era of divine connection. After the revelation, Jesus' expression grew solemn. What you have seen comes with great responsibility, he said, his voice carrying both warmth and warning. The forces that have kept this truth hidden will not remain idle. They will try to silence you. His words proved prophetic from the moment I opened my eyes in the hospital. The first signs were subtle. Medical records that mysteriously disappeared, security cameras that malfunctioned during my revival, witnesses whose stories suddenly changed. Dr. Rodriguez, who had documented the inexplicable events during my resuscitation, was mysteriously transferred to another hospital the very next day. The resistance escalated when I began to speak about my experience. During my first attempt to share my testimony at a local church, the entire electrical system failed. The pastor, who had initially welcomed my story, received anonymous calls warning him about hosting me again. The local newspaper reporter who interviewed me found his article mysteriously deleted from the system before publication. At home, things became more personal. My phone calls dropped whenever I discussed the revelation. Emails vanished. Text messages failed to send. One evening, while writing my testimony, my computer crashed and every word I had written disappeared. But more disturbing than the technical interference were the shadows I began to notice. Dark figures at the edge of my vision, always disappearing when I turned to look. Then came the direct confrontations. A man in a suit approached me after a speaking engagement, his smile never reaching his eyes. "Some truths are better left unspoken," he said softly, placing a hand on my shoulder that felt like ice. "Think about your family." He knew details about my life that no stranger should have known. But for every act of opposition, I witnessed confirmation of what Jesus had shown me. People began approaching me privately, sharing their own experiences of spiritual awakening. A grandmother who had always known there was more to her family's spiritual heritage than what she'd been taught. A young man who had dreams of ancient wisdom passed down through generations. The most powerful confirmation came during a small gathering where I shared my testimony. As I spoke, an elderly woman in the audience began to weep. "My grandmother," she said, her voice trembling, "told me stories passed down from slavery times. Stories about our people having spiritual powers that the slave masters feared. They made them stop practicing, forced them to forget, but some remembered in secret." Yet the opposition grew stronger with each truth revealed. Strange cars began parking outside my house. My phone lines filled with static and distant whispers. Friends who had supported me suddenly became distant, their eyes holding a mix of fear and apology when they turned away. One night, I woke to find my grandmother's cross, the one that had grown warm the morning of my death, lying on my bedside table, though I had been wearing it when I went to sleep. Next to it was a note written in handwriting I didn't recognize. "Some doors should remain closed." But Jesus' words echoed stronger than any threat. The time of silence is ending. Each attempt to silence the truth only confirmed its power. Each act of opposition revealed the desperation of those who had maintained the deception for centuries. This wasn't just my battle. It was part of a greater awakening, a fulfillment of ancient prophecies. The forces of opposition were strong, but they were fighting against something stronger, the truth itself, emerging like a sunrise that no amount of darkness could prevent. Jesus' presence intensified as he revealed what was to come. "Watch," he commanded, "for what you see must be shared with those who are ready to hear. Before me unfolded visions of the future, clear and undeniable. The first vision showed a great awakening, beginning in small gatherings and humble places. I saw people discovering ancient prayers hidden in their grandmother's Bibles, finding old journals with forgotten wisdom, remembering dreams that had haunted their families for generations. This awakening would start like a whisper, passed between trusted friends, shared in quiet rooms and sacred spaces. Look deeper, Jesus instructed. The vision shifted to show churches where true spiritual power was beginning to manifest, not in shouting or spectacle, but in genuine healing, in prophecies that came true, in wisdom that cut through generations of deception. I saw small prayer groups where people began remembering the ancient ways of connecting with the divine, not through intermediaries but directly as their ancestors had done. Then came images of resistance. Those who had maintained power through spiritual deception would not surrender easily. Churches would split. Families would divide. They will try to maintain control through fear, Jesus explained. But fear is losing its hold. I saw traditional religious leaders struggling to explain why their congregations were awakening to deeper truths, why the old methods of control no longer worked. The vision expanded to show global changes. Leaders who had built their authority on spiritual deception would begin to fall. Systems of oppression would start crumbling, not through violence or revolution, but through a massive spiritual awakening. My people will remember their true identity, Jesus said, and with that remembrance comes power that no earthly authority can resist. But this awakening would come with challenges. I saw natural disasters increasing, not as punishment, but as the earth itself responded to the spiritual resurrection. Old structures would fall, both literal and figurative. These are birth pains, Jesus explained, necessary for the new world to emerge. The most profound vision showed the restoration of ancient spiritual practices, but in a new form. I saw people rediscovering methods of prayer that could heal bodies and transform minds. The wisdom of African healers, long suppressed and dismissed, would resurface with undeniable power. The spiritual techniques preserved by grandmothers who practiced in secret would spread openly, their effectiveness impossible to deny. Watch what happens when my people pray with full understanding of who they are, Jesus said. The vision showed prayers that shook the foundations of oppressive systems, meditation that opened spiritual doors long thought sealed, worship that connected directly with divine power, instead of relying on human interpretation. But the most important revelation was about timing. This is not a distant future, Jesus emphasized. It has already begun. I saw dates and events, specific moments when the awakening would become impossible to ignore. Traditional religious leaders would try to explain it away. Scientists would attempt to find rational explanations. Media would try to distract from it. But the truth would become increasingly undeniable. Your role, Jesus said, is to help them remember. The vision showed me speaking to groups both small and large, not just telling my story, but helping others recognize the truth in their own experiences. I saw myself guiding people to rediscover their spiritual heritage, helping them understand the dreams and intuitions they'd been taught to ignore. The final vision was of unity, not the false unity of enforced agreement, but the true unity of different peoples, acknowledging and respecting each other's spiritual power. When my children remember who they are, Jesus said, they will lead the world into a new understanding of spiritual truth. As the vision faded, Jesus' words carried both promise and warning. The time of preparation is over. The awakening is here. Those who have ears to hear must now listen. Those who have eyes to see must now look. The truth can no longer be contained. My return to consciousness in the hospital room was jarring. The fluorescent light seemed harsh after the divine presence I had experienced. Dr. Rodriguez stood over me, her expression a mixture of disbelief and professional composure. "Welcome back," she said quietly, making notes in my chart. "You were gone for 7 minutes." The medical staff treated my recovery with a mix of clinical detachment and barely concealed wonder. My vital signs had returned to normal, with unexpected speed, but their charts and tests couldn't capture the profound transformation I had undergone. The attending physician noted in his report, Patient exhibits unusual clarity and awareness post-resuscitation. My family arrived within hours. My mother clutching her Bible, my sister trying to maintain her usual pragmatic demeanor. They had been told I had experienced cardiac arrest, but when I tried to explain what had really happened, their reactions revealed the first wave of resistance I would face. "You need rest," my mother said firmly, cutting off my attempt to describe the revelation. "The medication is still in your system." My sister, a psychiatric nurse, exchanged knowing looks with the hospital staff, quietly suggesting terms like post-traumatic stress and temporary confusion. But there was one person who understood. My grandmother's sister, Aunt Sarah, who had always been considered the family mystic. She visited late that night after the others had gone. Without a word, she took my hand and nodded. "They tried to make us forget," she whispered, "but some of us remembered. Some of us always knew." The resistance continued during my hospital stay. The chaplain who visited became visibly uncomfortable when I described meeting Jesus, especially when I shared his revelations about Black spiritual heritage. My medical records began showing inconsistencies. Notes about my time of death changed, details about my revival were altered or omitted. Even more troubling were the dreams, vivid warnings that came each night. I would see shadows gathering in the corners of my room, feel presences trying to silence the truth that burned within me. But with each attempt to suppress my story, the certainty of my mission grew stronger. By the time I was discharged, I understood that my real journey was just beginning. The truth I carried was too powerful to be silenced, too important to be forgotten again. After leaving the hospital, I began carefully documenting my experience, knowing each word carried profound significance. My first attempt to share the message came at a small Bible study group in my aunt's living room. As I spoke, an elderly woman in the corner began weeping silently. Later, she shared how her grandmother had passed down similar truths in whispered stories after midnight. Word spread organically through the community. People began inviting me to speak at church gatherings, community centers, and private homes. Each time I shared my testimony, someone in the audience would reveal their own connection to these hidden truths. A family prayer passed down through generations, a grandmother's secret healing practice, an ancient spiritual tradition preserved despite centuries of suppression. The opposition manifested in various ways. Church leaders who had initially welcomed my testimony suddenly canceled scheduled talks. Community centers received anonymous complaints. Local newspapers declined to cover the gatherings. Yet for every door that closed, two more opened through unexpected channels. A retired history professor attended one of my talks and stayed afterward, his hands trembling as he shared documents he discovered in university archives, records of spiritual practices that slaveholders had specifically targeted for suppression. A museum curator quietly showed me artifacts whose true spiritual significance had been deliberately misinterpreted. The message began spreading through social media, though not without interference. My posts would mysteriously disappear, videos would be deleted, accounts suspended without explanation. But people had already begun recording and sharing my testimony through their own networks. The truth was spreading beyond any ability to contain it. More remarkable were the confirmations that came from unexpected sources. Religious scholars began acknowledging historical evidence of advanced spiritual practices in ancient African civilizations. Elderly church members started speaking openly about spiritual traditions their families had kept hidden for generations. Yet the most powerful validation came from people experiencing their own awakening. They would approach me after gatherings, describing dreams, visions, and spiritual experiences that aligned perfectly with what Jesus had shown me. Many reported feeling a deep resonance with the message, as if it was awakening something that had always been within them, waiting to be remembered. The message I share with you today transcends mere history or personal testimony. What Jesus revealed during those 7 minutes carries an urgency that cannot be ignored. The awakening has already begun, and each person reading these words has a crucial decision to make. You may have felt it already. An inexplicable stirring in your spirit, a sense that there are deeper truths waiting to be remembered. Perhaps you've experienced dreams that seem to carry messages from ancestors, or felt a power within you that defies conventional explanation. These are not coincidences. They are the first signs of remembrance. For those who recognize this truth, your responsibility is clear. Begin by examining your own family history. Speak with your elders, especially those who have maintained connections to spiritual traditions. Document their stories, their prayers, their methods of healing and worship. These practices, preserved through generations of oppression, carry keys to spiritual power that was meant to be restored in this time. To the skeptics and those who doubt, I ask only this. Look beyond the surface of what you've been taught. Question why certain spiritual practices were specifically targeted for suppression. Ask yourself why some truths have been systematically hidden while others were promoted. The answers will lead you toward understanding. The time for hesitation has passed. Each person who awakens to this truth must become a carrier of the message. Share your experiences. Document your spiritual revelations. Create spaces where others can safely explore and reclaim their spiritual heritage. The opposition will continue, but their power diminishes with each person who embraces their true spiritual identity. Remember what Jesus revealed. This awakening isn't just about reclaiming lost history. It's about restoring spiritual power that was always meant to be part of humanity's development. The suppression of these truths has held back not just individuals or communities, but the spiritual evolution of all humanity. The choice now lies before you. You can dismiss this testimony as another strange story, or you can recognize it as the call to awakening it truly is. For those who choose to embrace this truth, know that you are not alone. Others are awakening alongside you, and the spiritual power that sustained our ancestors through centuries of oppression is still accessible today. The time has come. The truth can no longer be hidden. The awakening is here. Remember when we believed our history books told the whole story? Today, at this crucial moment in our lives, I share a truth that transcends politics, race, or religion, a truth that was revealed to me in the space between life and death. Our ancestors understood something profound about spiritual power, something that was systematically erased from our collective memory. Not through simple prejudice or ignorance, but through a deliberate campaign to disconnect us from our divine heritage. This suppression wasn't just about controlling bodies. It was about limiting humanity's spiritual potential. As parents, grandparents, and community leaders, we felt something was missing. We've watched our children struggle to find meaning in a world that seems increasingly chaotic. What if I told you that the power to heal this divide, to restore what was lost, lies dormant in our very blood? Jesus showed me that this awakening isn't just for one group. It's about restoring a truth that affects all humanity. The spiritual wisdom of ancient African traditions wasn't just cultural practice. It was a direct connection to divine power that we all desperately need today. The time for rediscovery is now, not in some distant future, but in our lifetime. Our generation has been chosen to remember, to reclaim, and to restore what was taken.